Hello again, friends. It's me, the boring narrator. And today, we're going to talk about the nullification crisis. As you may remember when we left off, our president was Andrew Jackson. He was up for re-election in 1832. His opponent was our old friend Henry Clay. However, Andrew Jackson beat Henry Clay pretty badly, and so was president again for the next 4 years. However, you may remember that his vice president was John Calhoun. However, John Calhoun did not run for vice president again. Instead, he was elected to the Senate. Andrew Jackson's vice president now was Martin Van Buren, who had been Secretary of State. You may also remember that there was a law, an unpopular law, called the Tariff of Abominations. This produced a lot of bad will. People were very upset about the Tariff of Abominations in the South. Our old friend John Q. Adams wrote a different tariff. Now he was in the House of Representatives, so he could do that. The Tariff of 1832. You may remember that a tariff is an extra tax on things that are imported or brought into the country. The Tariff of 1832 lowered those taxes. However, it did not lower them enough for everyone in the South to be happy. Here is where John Calhoun becomes a very important figure. John Calhoun had written a paper before about nullification. Nullification was the idea that because the states formed the government, there had been 13 colonies who formed a country, the states were the ones who were really in charge. And so, if Congress passed a bill, a law that they didn't like, they could declare it null and void. They could say, nope, that law doesn't count here. That was called nullification. Once the Tariff of 1832 went into effect, John Calhoun and the rest of South Carolina seemed to be very upset. South Carolina is the state that John Calhoun was from. And South Carolina had been hit especially hard by the tariffs. They had proved to be very hurtful to the economy of South Carolina. As a result, the state of South Carolina passed something called the Ordinance of Nullification. The Ordinance of Nullification was a state law that said the Tariff of 1828, aka the Tariff of Abominations, and the Tariff of 1832 were not laws in South Carolina, and they would stop paying the tax. This proved to be a crisis, the nullification crisis. At the time, a lot of people thought that this would lead to civil war. Congress passed something called the Force Act. This said that they could use military force, they could use soldiers to go collect the taxes, the tariffs. This proved to be kind of a tough thing since South Carolina was not planning to obey the tariff. However, before things could get to the point where there was going to be a civil war, Senators Henry Clay and John Calhoun managed to get through Congress the Compromise Tariff of 1833.
What the Compromise Tariff did was lower the taxes on imports enough that the South,
including South Carolina,
was willing to accept it. As such, they repealed their
Ordinance of Nullification.
However, they also passed a law nullifying the Force Act, which was the law that said that government troops could come and collect the tariff. Since South Carolina was already paying the tariff, the Force Act was not going to come into play. Nobody was going to have to send soldiers to collect the tariff. So this was a purely symbolic gesture. The North felt like they had won because now the South was going to pay the Compromise Tariff. And the South felt like they had won because they had forced the North to lower the tariff and had also nullified the Force Act just to prove they could do it.
What did all this solve? Nothing! Nullification continued to be a big issue. People wondered whether a state could actually nullify a law. There were huge arguments about this. Many of these arguments involved slavery. And as you might remember, the first shots in the Civil War were fired in South Carolina. So all of this is just going to get to be a bigger and bigger problem as we move forward. Tune in next time for more. And possibly we'll talk about the election of 1836. And the guy with the weird hair, Martin Van Buren.